Previously, in part 1, Ivy, all sunshine, and Sloane, all storm, became inseparable at Graston. Ivy fell in love, Sloane sabotaged her dates, and tension built until one rainy night Ivy confessed. Sloane's answer, a kiss that changed everything. Link for part 1 is in the description. She chanted Sloane's name, her fingers twisting in the dark sheets, her world narrowing to the point where Sloane's mouth met her skin. The climax ripped through her, violent and sweet, leaving her trembling and boneless. Sloane held her through it, whispering soft, ragged endearments against her thigh. Words Ivy had never dreamed of hearing from her. Before Ivy could even float down from the high, Sloane was moving up her body, kissing her deeply, letting her taste herself on Sloane's lips. The intimacy of it was staggering. "I need you," Sloane breathed, her voice roar with need. "Please, I need to feel you." Ivy nodded, pulling her down for another searing kiss. Yes, always. Their joining was a collision of souls. It was slow and deep at first, a fitting together of two pieces that had always belonged. Sloane's eyes never left Ivy's, the emotion in them so vast and unguarded it was almost too much to bear. Then the rhythm built, fueled by years of pent-up longing, becoming frantic, passionate, a desperate race toward a shared finish line. They moved together, a perfect chaotic symphony of gasps and skin and shared breath. Sloane's name was a prayer on Ivy's lips, and Ivy's was a vow on Sloane's. When they finally fell over the edge together, it was with a cry that was part sob, part triumph. Their bodies shuddering against each other, they lay tangled together in the aftermath, limbs heavy, hearts still hammering a frantic rhythm against each other's ribs. The rain had started again, a soft drumming on the roof. Sloane, usually so composed, was trembling, her face buried in Ivy's neck, her arms holding her so tightly it was as if she feared she might vanish. Ivy stroked her hair, her own tears mixing with the sweat on Sloane's skin. There were no words. None were needed. The silent trembling embrace said everything. Their souls, after years of orbiting each other, had finally cataclysmically collided. And in the wreckage of all their old defenses and doubts, something new and breathtakingly beautiful began to breathe. Part 7. The morning after. Ivy woke to the unfamiliar weight of another body. The scent of someone else's skin woven into the very air she breathed. The first gray light of dawn filtered through the blinds, striping the room in soft bands of silver. For a disorienting second, she didn't remember. And then she did. Every memory from the night before crashed over her in a warm, dizzying wave. Sloane's commanding kiss, the feel of her hands, the whispered words that were neither grumpy nor sarcastic, but raw and reverent. The way they had stumbled through the door of Sloane's apartment, unable to keep their hands or lips from one another. She was lying on her side, and Sloane was wrapped around her from behind, a living blanket of warmth and possession. One of Sloane's arms was draped heavily over Ivy's waist. Her hands played possessively across her stomach. Sloane's face was buried in the nape of Ivy's neck, her breath slow, even tied against Ivy's spine. Their legs were tangled together under the rumpled sheets. Ivy held perfectly still, afraid to breathe, afraid to break the spell. This was Sloane, her Sloane, the grumpy, sarcastic fortress who had impossibly let her in, who had kissed her like she was oxygen, and worried her until she wept. The reality of it was so immense it felt like a dream, a part of her, the part that had ached for so long. Braced for the morning after regret for the wall to slam back down. As if sensing her wakefulness, Sloane stirred behind her. A low, sleep-rough murmur vibrated against Ivy's back. The arm around her waist tightened infinitesimally, pulling her closer. Sloane nuzzled deeper into her hair, inhaling slowly. You smell like us," Sloane mumbled, her voice a growly whisper that sent a shiver straight through Ivy. Ivy's heart flipped over. She slowly turned in the circle of Sloane's arms, the sheets whispering with the movement. Facing her now, she could see the sleep-softened lines of Sloane's face, Her dark hair was a messy halo on the pillow, her usually sharp features relaxed and open. Without the armor of her scowls and sarcasm, she looked younger, vulnerable. "Good morning," Ivy whispered, her voice shy. Sloane's stormy eyes blinked, open. They were hazy with sleep, but they focused on Ivy immediately, a flicker of something uncertain, almost nervous, passing through them before it was replaced by a warm, lazy intensity. A faint pink blush crept up Sloane's neck. She was blushing. "It's early," Sloane grumbled, but it was a performative grumble, devoid of any real heat. Her hand, which had been on Ivy's stomach, slid up to cup her cheek, her thumb stroking the apple of her cheek with a tenderness that made Ivy's eyes prickle with tears. "You're smiling," Sloane observed, her tone accusatory, but her eyes were soft. "It's too early for people who smile too much in the morning. The sun's not even properly up. It's irresponsible." Ivy couldn't help it. She laughed, a soft, joyful sound. She leaned forward and pressed a gentle, lingering kiss to Sloane's lips. "I can't help it." Sloane's grumpy facade melted completely at the kiss. She hummed against Ivy's mouth, her hand moving from Ivy's cheek to tangle in her hair, holding her there for a deeper, slower, more thorough good morning kiss. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing a little faster. "I suppose I can make an exception," Sloane murmured, her lips curving into a small, genuine smile. A rare, breathtaking sight that Ivy wanted to capture and keep forever. They lay there for a long time, just watching each other in the quiet dawn. Sloane's fingers traced idle patterns on Ivy's shoulder, down her arm, as if memorizing her by touch. The silence was comfortable, saturated with a new and profound understanding. "I should probably," Ivy started to say, making a faint motion, to get up, to reintroduce reality into their perfect bubble. Sloane's arm instantly tightened around her, holding her in place. "No, no, the world can wait," Sloane stated, as if issuing a decree. Her clinginess from the previous weeks was still there, but it had transformed. It was no longer a confused, possessive gesture, but a certain deliberate one. She knew what she wanted now, and she wanted Ivy right here. "I'm cold," she added, the old flimsy excuse now a beloved shared joke between them. Ivy giggled and snuggled closer, tucking her head under Sloane's chin. "Okay." Later, they stumbled into Sloane's shower together. It was less about getting clean and more about the excuse to be under spray of warm water together, to soap each other's skin with slow, worshipful hands, to kiss under the steam until they were breathless and dizzy. Sloane washed Ivy's hair with a surprising, meticulous care, massaging her scalp and then gently rinsing the suds away. Her touch saying everything her words still struggled to. Wrapped in towels, they made a simple breakfast of toast and coffee. Sloane, back in her customary black sweatpants and tank top, would pause while spreading jam to just look at Ivy, who was swimming in one of Sloane's old band t-shirts, her hair damp and curling around her face. The look in Sloane's eyes was one of undisguised awe, as if she couldn't quite believe Ivy was really here in her kitchen belonging to her. "What?" Ivy asked, feeling self-conscious under the intense gaze. Sloane just shook her head, a slow smile spreading across her face. "Nothing, just mine." The words spoken with such quiet conviction sent a thrill through Ivy. The day unspooled in a haze of gentle discovery. They migrated back to the bed, not for passion, but for the simple pleasure of touch. They talked, really talked, without any of the old barriers. Sloane confessed, her voice low and hesitant, that she'd been irrationally irritated by Ivy's dates because the thought of anyone else touching her made her feel feral. "I was an idiot," Sloane admitted, her forehead pressed against Ivy's. "I thought it was just protectiveness, that I was just a good friend. But the thought of you getting over me," she shuddered. "It felt like the world ending. I was too stubborn and too scared to ever say it." Ivy kissed her, pouring years of love and longing into it. "You don't have to be scared anymore." Sloane's answering kiss was a vow. I'm not. As the afternoon light began to fade, painting the room in gold, they lay entwined, limbs heavy with contentment. Sloane lay with her ear on Ivy's chest, following the rhythm of her heartbeat. Their fingers were threaded together. You know, Ivy murmured, combing her free hand through Sloane's hair. You're awfully cuddly for someone who thinks love is a government scam. Sloane turned, pressing a kiss over the steady thrum above Ivy's heart. I've rerun the numbers, she whispered, voice thick with sleep and contentment. My conclusion was flawed. This year, you're the only thing that truly adds up. In the warm, quiet shelter of Sloane's embrace, Ivy recognized the feeling instantly. Home. The morning after wasn't an ending or a beginning, but a seamless, lovely continuation. The ache had vanished, replaced by a radiant, even glow. For the first time, she wasn't in love with Sloane despite the sharp edges. She was in love with the whole of her. The grouch and the grace, the armor, and the astonishing softness under it. And it was returned fully, completely, finally. Part 8. Banter and Bliss. The world didn't collapse. The sky stayed put. Instead, everything bloomed in vivid color. Life after the confession wasn't upheaval. It was an easy settling into a truth that had always been there. Their relationship became a graceful duet of opposites, a symphony where Sloane's grumbling bass line matched Ivy's bright melody. Their place a snug off-campus apartment they'd already shared. Once in separate rooms, now hilariously obsolete, became the stage for their everyday rom-com. Often, it played out in the kitchen. Sloane, surprisingly capable at the stove when she cared to be, would be stirring a pot of sauce. Brow pinched in concentration, Ivy drifted in, humming, looping her arms around Sloane's waist from behind, and pressing a kiss to her shoulder blade. Sloane would tense for a beat, a leftover reflex from a lifetime of dodging touch, then melt back with a soft sigh. You're going to make me burn this, she'd murmur, tilting her head to offer Ivy's lips better territory at her neck. You're too good to burn it. Ivy would breathe against her skin, her hands slipping beneath the hem of Sloane's T-shirt to rest on the warm, flat plane of her stomach. Sloane shivered. Flattery is a manipulative tactic. Is it working? Keep going. Banter was their love language. One night, curled on the couch with a documentary on organized crime playing, Sloane gestured at the screen with her beer. That's marriage's state-approved racket. You buy a license, invite the government into your private life, blow a fortune on a party for everyone else. And for what? A tax perk and a lifetime of arguing about the dishwasher. It's a con. Ivy, lazily tracing designs on Sloane's thigh, only smiled. MHM. The next day, Sloane found a bridal magazine open on the coffee table to a page of extravagant, puffy white gowns. She snorted, dropped it in recycling, said nothing. The day after, a different magazine appeared on the kitchen counter, spread wide to tropical honeymoon escapes. Sloane eyed it, a smirk tugging at her mouth, and left it where it lay. The following day, a third magazine showed up on her pillow, this one featuring sleek, modern tuxedos. That evening, Sloane walked into the bedroom holding it up. Are you trying to tell me something? Ivy looked up from her book. All innocence. Just doing research on government-sanctioned cons. Sloane stalked over to the bed, a predatory glint in her eye. She plucked the book from Ivy's hands and tossed it aside. The only research you need to be doing is on how quickly I can get you out of these clothes, she growled, leaning down to capture Ivy's lips in a searing kiss that effectively ended the conversation. For the moment, Sloane's possessiveness, once a source of confused pain, was now a thrilling, open secret. Her hands were constantly on Ivy, a low-level current of connection thrumming between them. In public, it was a hand on the small of her back, a thumb hooked in her belt loop, fingers laced tightly together. In private, it was more. Ivy would be standing at the sink washing dishes, and Sloane would come up behind her, her body molding to Ivy's. her hands sliding past her hips to take over the scrubbing. "You're inefficient," she'd mutter, her lips on Ivy's neck. Or Ivy would be bent over textbook at their desk, and Sloane's hands would slip under her skirt, palms warm on her thighs, her touch a demand and a promise that made concentration utterly impossible. "Sloane, I'm trying to study." Ivy would pretend to scold, even as she leaned back into the touch, a flush creeping up her chest. "This is more important," Sloane would whisper, her voice a dark honeyed promise as her fingers traced higher, finding the lace edge of Ivy's underwear. "I'm conducting a very important study on the effects of distraction on academic performance." Ivy would inevitably melt, her head falling back against Sloane's shoulder, any thought of protest forgotten. She secretly loved it. The boldness, the certainty, the way Sloane's desire for her was a tangible, relentless force. This possessiveness flared brightest when they went out together. The dynamic was the same, but the context had shifted deliciously. They were at a noisy campus bar, and a guy from Ivy's economics class, a friendly, oblivious sort, came over to say hello. He made a joke and Ivy laughed, touching his arm lightly in a purely platonic gesture. From beside her, Sloane went still. Her arm, which had been draped over the back of Ivy's chair, tightened. She didn't say a word, but her gaze on the poor guy could have frozen lava. Sensing the sudden Arctic chill, the guy made a hasty retreat. Ivy turned to Sloane, raising an eyebrow. Sloane immediately tried to play it cool, taking a slow sip of her drink. "You know," Ivy said, her voice dripping with playful sweetness, "he was just talking about the midterm. I don't think he was proposing marriage." Sloane scowled into her glass. His eyes lingered to 0.3 seconds too long. "It was statistically suspicious." "Statistically suspicious?" Ivy giggled, leaning closer. "Or were you just jealous?" Sloane's head snapped up, her expression one of mock outrage. "Jealousy is an irrational emotion born of insecurity. I was merely performing a routine threat assessment." But the faint pink tinge on her cheeks betrayed her. Ivy's smile widened. She leaned in until her lips were almost brushing Sloane's ear. "You know," she whispered, "you don't have to be. There's no one in this world, in any world, who could ever compete with you. You're it for me." The tension drained from Sloane's shoulders. The scowl softened into something tender and raw. She turned her head and captured Ivy's lips in a kiss that was less about possession and more about gratitude, a silent acknowledgement of the truth Ivy had just spoken. When they parted, she rested her forehead against Ivy's. "Your threat assessment is concluded," Sloane murmured, her voice rough. "The subject has been neutralized permanently by your charm." Ivy teased. "By my overwhelming superiority in all categories," Sloane corrected, but she was smiling as she said it, her thumb stroking Ivy's cheek. Their bliss was a living thing woven from threads of passionate argument, steamy possessiveness, and a profound grounding tenderness. They were two halves of a whole, finally snapped together, their jagged edges fitting perfectly. Sloane still grumbled about the government and the pointlessness of romantic traditions, but she did it now with her head in Ivy's lap, while Ivy played with her hair and smiled, knowing the truth. The grumbling was just noise. The love, fierce, devoted, and all-consuming, was the only thing that was real. Part 9. The Soulmate Confession. The evening was a soft, hazy watercolor of contentment. They were sprawled on their living room floor, surrounded by a fortress of textbooks, highlighters, and empty mugs that testified to a long study session. Finals were looming, a shared stress that had morphed into a kind of cozy domestic solidarity. The only light came from a single floor lamp, casting a warm golden pool that isolated them from the rest of the world. Ivy was lying on her stomach, chin propped on her hands, frowning at a dense paragraph on macroeconomic theory. Sloane was sitting against the couch, one leg stretched out, the other bent, with Ivy's head resting on her thigh. It was a position they'd fallen into countless times before, but now it was different. Now, Sloane's hand wasn't just resting nearby. Her fingers were slowly, rhythmically carding through Ivy's blonde hair, scratching gently at her scalp in a way that made Ivy's eyelids flutter with pleasure. This was their new normal, a constant, quiet exchange of touch that spoke louder than words ever could. Yet, for all its beauty, a tiny, anxious knot had begun to form in Ivy's stomach. They'd been living in this blissful bubble for weeks, but they'd never put a name to it. The "what are we" question hovered in the air between them, unasked, a ghost at the feast of their happiness. She tried to ignore it, to just bask in the joy of having Sloane's love, however it was given. But the old fears, the years of pining and misunderstanding, were hard to completely silence. What if, to Sloane, this was still just an intense physical extension of their friendship? What if she still saw a romantic label as part of the scam? Sloane's thumb stroked the shell of Ivy's ear, and the touch, so tender, made the anxiety spike. She needed to know. She couldn't build her future on a foundation of beautiful assumptions. Taking a shaky breath, she rolled onto her back, looking up at Sloane. The movement broke the rhythm of Sloane's ministrations. "Hey," Ivy whispered. Sloane looked down, her face softened by the lamplight. "Hey, give up on Keen's finally." "No." Ivy's courage faltered. She reached up and took Sloane's hand, lacing their fingers together. "I need to ask you something." Something in her tone must have given her away. The casual ease drained from Sloane's expression, replaced by a watchful attentiveness. She didn't pull away, but her grip tightened almost imperceptibly. "Okay, shoot." Ivy's heart was a frantic drum against her ribs. "This us. What are we, Sloane?" The question hung in the warm, quiet air, stark and simple. Sloane's gaze didn't waver, but Ivy saw the minute flicker in her eyes, a flash of panic, the old instinct to deflect, to build a wall of sarcasm. Her jaw tightened. She was silent for a long moment, her eyes searching Ivy's, and Ivy could almost see the internal war raging behind them, the part of her that was still the grumpy, cynical freshman who trusted no one versus the woman who had been utterly, irrevocably undone by the person lying in her lap. Finally, Sloane looked away, her gaze fixed on their joined hands. She let out a slow, controlled breath as if steadying herself for a leap. "You're going to make me say it, aren't you?" she muttered, her voice rough. It wasn't angry. It was resigned, almost shy. "Say what?" Ivy prompted, her voice barely a whisper. Sloane's eyes slid shut for a second. When she opened them, she looked directly at Ivy, and all the defenses were gone. The walls were down. What was left was raw, terrifyingly honest, and more beautiful than anything Ivy had ever seen. "We're soulmates." The words spoken in Sloane's low, growly voice, devoid of any irony or sarcasm, was like a lightning strike. It was so much more than girlfriends or partners. It was a cosmic declaration. Ivy's breath caught in her throat. Sloane continued, her words coming out in a rush now, as if having breached the dam, the flood had to follow. "You're the only person in the world for me. The only one who gets to be this close." She brought their joined hands to her lips and pressed a fierce kiss to Ivy's knuckles. "The only one who gets to have me like this." She paused, gathering herself, her brow furrowed as if she were solving the most complex problem of her life. And the answer was astonishingly simple. "I don't believe in a lot of things. I think most of it is noise. But you're the only thing that's ever been real. You're the signal in all the static." Tears were streaming freely down Ivy's temples now, soaking into her hair. She didn't try to stop them. Sloane saw them, and her expression softened even further. She used her free hand to gently wipe a tear away with her thumb. "And if I have to deal with the government's ridiculous paperwork, and the diamond industrial complex, and the whole scam of a wedding," she said, the old grumble returning to her voice, but now leered with a profound aching tenderness, "just To wake up to you every single day, to have the right to do this. She leaned down and kissed Ivy softly, pouring a universe of feeling into it. And this, she whispered against her lips, her hand cupping Ivy's cheek. She pulled back just enough to look into Ivy's eyes, her own shining with unshed tears. Her voice dropped to a raw, vulnerable whisper that shattered Ivy completely. Then fine. You're worth it. You're worth all of it. Every stupid, sentimental, bureaucratic bit of it. The world didn't just freeze. It melted away. There was no apartment, no textbooks, no finals. There was only Sloane and her confession, and the overwhelming, breathtaking love that filled the space between them. A sound escaped Ivy, a half sob, half laugh of pure, unadulterated joy. She surged up, wrapping her arms around Sloane's neck, pulling her down into a crushing embrace. She was laughing and crying all at once, burying her face in Sloane's neck. "You mean that?" She choked out, the words muffled against her skin. Sloane held her tightly, one hand cradling the back of her head. "I don't say things I don't mean," she said, her own voice thick with emotion. "It's inefficient." Ivy pulled back, her face radiant with tears and a smile so bright it could have powered the city. She framed Sloane's face with her hands. "My grumpy, beautiful, romantic soulmate." Sloane actually groaned, but she was smiling, too. A real unreserved smile that reached her eyes. "Don't push it. Romantic is still a stretch." But she was kissing Ivy again and again, and in between kisses, she whispered it against her lips. A vow for only them to hear. Soulmates. Part 10. Passionate obsession? The confession of soulmates didn't just change their relationship. It unleashed it. It was as if a final crucial dam had broken within them both, and the resulting flood was a torrent of pure, unfiltered devotion. Their love was not a gentle stream. It was a force of nature, all-consuming, breathtaking, and fiercely beautiful. From that moment on, they existed in a world of their own making, a bubble of shared heat and understanding that the outside world could glance into but never truly penetrate. It was a storm of passion and tenderness, a whirlwind where Sloane's intensity and Ivy's radiance swirled together into something inseparable and whole. They truly could not keep their hands off each other. It was a physical imperative, a constant, low-level hum of connection that demanded to be acknowledged. Walking to class, Sloane's hand would slip under the hem of Ivy's jacket to rest on the small of her back, her thumb stroking idle, possessive circles through the fabric. In the library, they would claim a secluded carol, and Sloane would pull Ivy onto her lap, burying her face in her neck to breathe her in while Ivy pretended to study, her concentration a lost cause. They were that couple, the one who made people roll their eyes with a fond smile or look away with a pang of envy. Their kisses evolved into a language of their own. There were the quick, soft ones, goodbye at the door, a simple punctuation mark in their day. There were the slow, deep, searching ones. Hello, a full sentence of reunion. And then there were the desperate, fiery ones that happened in the shadows of a campus building against their front door the second it closed in the rain under broken street lamp. Kisses that were paragraphs, chapters, entire volumes of want and worship. Sloane, who had once mocked public displays of affection as performative biology, became the worst or best offender. She'd kiss Ivy in the middle of a crowded street, cupping her face with a reverence that made the chaos of the city fade into a distant murmur. She'd whisper, "I love you," against Ivy's lips, not as a sweet nothing, but as a solemn vow, a stark truth delivered in the hushed tone of someone confessing a secret. The first time she said it, unprompted in the dairy aisle of the grocery store, Ivy had dropped a tub of yogurt. Sloane had just smirked, kissed her again, and bought her a new one. Their home was a sanctuary of laughter and tangled limbs. Evenings were spent in a tangle on the couch. But now the studying was often abandoned for more pressing explorations. Sloane's hands were indeed constantly under Ivy's skirts, under her sweaters, on her skin, as if she needed the constant tactile confirmation that this was real, that Ivy was hers. Ivy would pretend to scold her, swatting her hand away with a laugh. "We'll never get anything done." Sloane would just look at her, her stormy eyes dark with desire and something infinitely softer. "This is the only thing worth doing," she'd murmur, and her conviction was so absolute that Ivy would inevitably surrender, melting into the couch and into Sloane's relentless, worshipful touch. She became fiercely protective, obsessive even. Her threat assessments of anyone who looked at Ivy for too long were now done with a smug proprietary air, her arm a permanent fixture around Ivy's shoulders. She wasn't just guarding her best friend anymore. She was proudly standing beside her partner, her soulmate. When a braver soul dared to flirt, Sloane's responses were still sharp, but now laced with a new humor. "The exhibit is off limits," she deadpan, pulling Ivy closer. Permanently acquired for a private collection. Ivy would just shake her head, laughing, her heart fit to burst. And through it all, Ivy, radiant and playful, was Sloane's anchor. She was the one who remembered to pay the electric bill, who dragged Sloane out for walks when she'd been brooding over her books for too long, who knew exactly when Sloane's sharpness was a sign of an oncoming headache and would appear with aspirin and a cool cloth without being asked. She grounded the storm, not by trying to calm it, but by standing steadfast within it, her own lighter beacon. Sloane could always navigate by. Their love was messy. They still argued passionately about everything from politics to the correct way to load a dishwasher. Sloane could still be grumpy and cynical before her first coffee. Ivy could still be overly idealistic. But the arguments now ended in laughter or in bed, often both. The mess was part of the beauty. It was real. It was them. One night, lying in the dark, limbs entwined, skin slick with sweat, Ivy traced the lines of Sloane's face. "You know," she whispered, "for someone who never believed in love, you're remarkably good at it." Sloane caught her hand and kissed her palm. "I didn't believe in it because I'd never experienced it," she said, her voice quiet in the darkness. "It was an abstract, poorly defined concept. Then you were the data that proved my entire thesis wrong. You're not the exception to the rule, Ivy. You are the rule, the only one that matters." For Sloane, who had built her life on logic and self-reliance, it was the most romantic declaration imaginable. For Ivy, who had always dreamed of a love that felt like coming home, she realized she was already there. Home wasn't a place. It was the steady beat of Sloane's heart. Under her ear, the sound of her grumpy voice complaining about the morning, the feeling of her hands, possessive and tender, always finding her. They had traveled such different paths to get here, one paved with skepticism, the other with hope. But those paths had converged in this perfect, chaotic, glorious middle ground. Sloane, the stone, had not just been warmed by the sun. She had learned to hold its heat, to reflect its light, to become a foundation for something beautiful to grow. And Ivy, the sunshine, had learned that her light was not diminished by the stone shadows, but made more profound by them. Their love was a collision of opposites, a perfect, balanced equation. It was fierce and gentle, passionate and peaceful, obsessive and freeing. It was the wild, beautiful, unshakable home they had built, not just with words, but with every touch, every glance, every whispered, "I love you" in the dark. They had found their person, their soulmate, and in each other's arms, they were finally completely home. Epilogue. The government-sanctioned scam and why it was worth it. 5 years. 5 years since Sloane had first kissed Ivy in a storm of pent-up longing. 5 years of shared sunrises, of whispered arguments over whose turn it was to make coffee, of Sloane's grumbling being met with Ivy's laughter, of a love so deep and settled it felt like the very bedrock of the universe. And today, Sloane was voluntarily walking directly into what she had once called the most elaborate and financially irresponsible trap ever conceived by the matrimonial industrial complex. She was getting married. The ceremony was a small sun-drenched affair in a botanical garden, a compromise between Ivy's desire for beauty and Sloane's desire to avoid a church full of staring people. The guests were a curated collection of their closest friends, the few who had weathered Sloane's early storms and had cheered the loudest. When the sunshine finally broke through, Sloane stood at the makeshift altar, her hands clasped tightly behind her back. She looked devastatingly handsome in a tailored dark navy suit that made her stormy eyes seem even darker. Her expression was a carefully constructed mask of stoic patience, but any fool could see the nervous energy thrumming beneath the surface. Her gaze was fixed on the end of the flowerin path, a laser focus usually reserved for philosophical debates and dismantling idiots on the internet. Then the music shifted, and Sloane's entire world narrowed to a single point. Ivy appeared on her father's arm, and the breath left Sloane's lungs in a silent, painful rush. She was a vision in a simple, elegant gown that seemed woven from moonlight and champagne. It hugged her curves before flowing softly to the ground, and with every step she took towards Sloane, the world seemed to get brighter, sharper, more beautiful. But Sloane's poet's heart, which only ever beat for Ivy, was already wearing with her more immediate instincts. As Ivy drew closer, her eyes glistening with happy tears, a slow, wicked smirk spread across Sloane's face. The officiant began to speak, words about love and commitment and forever. Sloane heard them as a distant hum. Her entire concentration was on her wife-to-be wife. The words sent a possessive thrill through her so potent it was a physical ache. Her hands, which had been clasped so properly behind her back, unclenched. As the officiant droned on about the sanctity of marriage, Sloane's right hand snaked out. With the stealth of a seasoned predator, her fingers found the delicate lace of Ivy's dress just at her hip. She let her fingertips brush against it, a whisper of a touch. Ivy's breath hitched. Her eyes, which had been locked on Sloane's, flickered down for a microsecond. A faint, delicious blush crept up her chest. She didn't pull away. Encouraged, Sloane let her fingers trail a fraction lower, skimming the sensitive skin just above Ivy's thigh, hidden from the audience by the bouquet Ivy held. Her thumb stroked a slow, deliberate circle. The officiant asked Sloane if she would take Ivy to be her wife. "I do," Sloane said, her voice low and husky, her eyes burning into Ivy's. Her thumb pressed more firmly against Ivy's leg, a secret promise. It was Ivy's turn. The officiant asked the question. Ivy's voice was a breathless, happy tremor. "I do." Sloane's other hand joined the first, both now resting on Ivy's hips, pulling her a half-step closer under the guise of matrimonial fervor. The space between them crackled with an electricity the vows alone could never generate. "You may now kiss." Sloane didn't let him finish. She surged forward, capturing Ivy's lips in a kiss that was far less about sanctity and far more about raw, desperate possession. It was deep, hungry, and spoke volumes of what she truly wanted to be doing at that very moment. A few of the guests chuckled. Most just sighed with romantic delight, completely missing the fact that Sloane's hands were now gripping Ivy's waist with an intensity that suggested she was moments from throwing her over her shoulder and carrying her off. The kiss ended, but Sloane didn't pull far back. She rested her forehead against Ivy's, her eyes dark with promise. "You're mine," she whispered, a growl meant only for her wife. "Always," Ivy whispered back, her smile radiant. What followed was the longest cocktail hour and reception in the history of time. At least, according to Sloane, she played her part. She endured the toasts, her armor permanent, tight band around Ivy's waist, her fingers often dipping just below the waistband of her dress at the back. She slow danced with her wife, pulling her so close there was no space between them. And, during a particularly slow dip, she nuzzled her face into Ivy's neck and whispered, "Do you have any idea what I'm going to do to you when I finally get you out of this dress?" Ivy shivered violently, her knees going weak. Sloane, she hissed, half scandalized, half turned on beyond reason. I'm just expressing my deep appreciation for the institution of marriage. Sloane deadpanned, righting her hands sliding down to give Ivy's backside a firm, hidden squeeze. Through the cake cutting, through the pictures, through the well wishes, Sloane's campaign of whispered seduction and stealthy touches was relentless. The car is just a 3-minute walk away. My hands are cold. I need to warm them up. Under this dress seems efficient. We could just leave. They'd understand. Probably. Ivy laughed. She blushed. She swatted her wife's hand away only for it to return. Moments later, she was floating on a cloud of happiness, made infinitely giddier by Sloane's delicious, impatient obsession. Finally, it was time for their send-off. As they ran through a tunnel of sparklers held by their friends, Sloane's hand wasn't in the air. It was firmly on Ivy's backside, pushing her toward their getaway car, a sleek black sedan with deeply tinted windows. The second the door closed, sealing them in private, Sloane pounced. Drive. She barked at the driver before pulling the partition window up with a sharp snap. Then she turned to Ivy, her eyes blazing in the dim light. You, me now, Sloane, we're in a car. Ivy giggled, but she was already melting, her body arching toward Sloane's like a flower to the sun. I'm aware, Sloane murmured, her fingers already working at the delicate buttons on the back of Ivy's dress. And I've waited 5 years and 7 agonizing hours to have my wife all to myself. The car is just the beginning. Her mouth found Ivy's in a searing kiss as her hands finally slipped the gown from her shoulders. The drive home was a blur of frantic hands, hot skin, and whispered promises. Sloane made good on every single one of them the second they stumbled through the door of their apartment, the wedding dress ending up in a puddle of lace and moonlight by the doorway. Later, much later, they lay tangled in the sheets of their own bed, the scent of gardeners and each other clinging to their skin. Ivy's head was on Sloane's chest, listening to the steady, satisfied beat of her heart. Sloane traced idle patterns on Ivy's bare shoulder. So, she said, her voice a contented rumble. So, Ivy smiled, tilting her head up to look at her. The government sanctioned scam, Sloane said. Turns out it has its perks. Oh, and what perks are those? Ivy teased, knowing full well. Sloane rolled over, pinning Ivy beneath her, her expression suddenly serious and unbearably soft. She looked at Ivy, really looked at her hair a mess, her lips kiss-swollen, her eyes full of a love that had never dimmed. The perk, Sloane said, her voice thick with emotion, is that I get to call the love of my life, my soulmate, my everything, my wife, and I get to do this. She leaned down and kissed her slow and deep and full of a lifetime of promise whenever I want. Ivy cubed her face, her thumb stroking Sloane's cheek. I love you, my grumpy, beautiful wife. Sloane's smirk returned, laced with a new, profound tenderness. I love you more, my radiant, brilliant wife. Now, about those tax breaks. Ivy burst into laughter, pulling Sloane down for another kiss. The scam, it turned out, was the best deal Sloane had ever made.